Good Friday afternoon, Dawg Nation. Welcome in to Go With The Flow, presented by R.S. Andrews. Our chance to come back together and make some picks. But the upcoming weekend slate of games from a point spread perspective, we'll try our best to give you some winners here over the course of the next few minutes. The entirety of the Dawg Nation team, at least many of us anyway, Mike Griffith, Jeff Sintel, Connor Riley, Kaylee Manziel, me, Brandon Adams, the host of DawgNation Daily. We'll all share our thoughts here in a moment, including Georgia against Tennessee. And then after that, Dari Payrow from R.S. Andrews, who always has the cool-looking House of Pain background there for his shot. He'll decide if he wants to go with the flow and join our consensus on all of these picks here coming up. So it's a fun slate of games. We're getting into the crunch time for the college football playoff, and many of the games we'll pick here this weekend certainly reflect the magnitude of that moment. Before we get into this week's slate, let me give you a couple of reminders. First of all, we do keep track of how we're doing here, for better or for worse. And we'll give you an update here on our season-long standings here. I've had a little bit of a stretch here where no losing week for me. I don't believe all season long, but have not quite had a winning week here in a little while, and that is providing a chance for folks to gain some ground here on me. I'm still leading the standings on the year and still 10 games over 500, so obviously profitable. But 3-3 on the week gives Jeff Sintel, after a 4-2 week, a chance to sneak in there. Just 2 games back right now at 33-27. Even week last week for Connor Riley, but a winning season on the campaign, 31-29. Kaylee Manziel also 3-3 last week, and she's also dead even on the year at 30-30. Mike Griffith was 2-4 last week, but still 27-33 on the year. Same season-long record for Dari Payrow, who was 500 last week. So really, you're talking about only a handful of games separating first place from the bottom. So obviously, with many more games still to pick, anybody's ball game as we move forward. Of course, as we do, we'll remind you all of this is brought to you by our friends at R.S. Andrews, your choice for air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. What that means is, if you're like me, sometimes in the morning, sometimes in the evening, you sort of notice that little bit of a nip in the air. Now, frankly, probably not as much as you'd like to have maybe for the fall, but we have had some of that, which means that it's a good reminder that it's about time to get that heating system tuned back up to factory fresh spec, so when it does finally get cold, eventually it will, you'll be able to stay toasty and warm all winter long with our friends at R.S. Andrews. They want to take care of you on that. You can find them online at rsandrews.com, and they'll do all of that for you today. They do a lot of things well. Georgia perhaps not lately doing as much well as we would like, but they get a very big change in venue here this week. After a rigorous stretch of games away from Athens, they get to return home between the hedges on Saturday with the Tennessee Vols looming. It's a perhaps playoff elimination game. Maybe on the Georgia side, Tennessee would like to think differently on that. But one way or another, high playoff stakes, and Georgia seeing itself as a surprisingly large favorite based on the result last week against Ole Miss. The number we're going with is 9.5. You may have to shop around if you want to find that line. There's been some change in this as of late. But let's find out more about Georgia hosting Tennessee and the massive implications that are at stake here.
Georgia are 9.5-point favorites over Tennessee this weekend. It's a series the Dogs have owned recently, winning the last 7 matchups between the two. And not only that, Georgia has covered in 6 of those 7 wins over Tennessee. The last time the Vols came into Sanford Stadium as road underdogs and came out with a victory, well, you'd have to go all the way back to 2004.
Good numbers there from Cody Chaffins, but the number that matters is 9.5. Georgia favored at home over Tennessee. Mike Griffith, start us off.
Well, I think this is when, Kirby's at his best. I mean, I think we were talking about a crossroads road game at Texas earlier this year, and we saw Georgia, I thought, play its best football of the season. Ole Miss, I think, a better front 7 than Tennessee. Tennessee recently with some struggles stopping the run. If Georgia can find that offensive balance, I do think the crowd will factor in. So give me the Dogs and lay the points.
So Mike Griffith laying those points there. Jeff Sintel, what about for you?
That's pretty bold there, Mike. I think the Dogs will win. I think the streak at home, which is the only streak left that goes back to 2019 South Carolina, will be intact. But that's too many points. That's too many points the way Georgia's playing right now. I think the path to a victory for Georgia starts up front, but a lot of their offensive efficiency right now is stalling up front. That's why I don't think they can cover this 9.5. I'm going to take the Vols. Give me those points.
So split decision. Connor Riley, jump on in here. What do you think about Georgia favored 9.5?
Yeah, this is the rat line of the week, just given the way Georgia played a week ago, the way that Tennessee comes in entering this game. And I'm going to take Tennessee here. I'm going to be the square. I'm going to pick the Volunteers. Don't know if they're going to necessarily win the game, but I'm going to take Tennessee. And look, if I'm right, I'm right. And if I'm wrong, that means Georgia wins by double digits, and everyone in theory should go home happy. So give me the Volunteers in the 9.5.
All right, Kaylee, you hear Connor's deliberation there. What about for you? 9.5, a little bit of tricky number given how badly Georgia played last week.
Not that tricky. I'm also going to take Tennessee. I think both teams know this is a do or die game. Whoever wins gets in. Whoever doesn't is out. So I think both teams will keep it close. I think Georgia takes the win, but I don't think they cover that 9.5. Give me the Vols.
So a little bit of love for Tennessee, at least plus the points right now. And, I mean, to be completely candid, I'm tempted to do the same thing here. I've said on the show many times that when it comes to picking Georgia to lose a game, I'm almost never going to do that unless it's really, really dire straits here. But I don't feel any misgivings about taking the opponent plus the points. I do that on Go With The Flow a pretty good bit. So I wouldn't be afraid to take Tennessee plus the points. But ultimately, I see the value here in Georgia. It certainly seems like, from when we're recording the show to where it's likely to be come, Friday by the time you see it, it seems like there's actually value moving in the direction here on Georgia, which kind of goes back to what we speak about a lot. Somebody somewhere seems to know something that our own eyes would perhaps not suggest as being true based on how badly Georgia's played. One of those things could perhaps be this, is that Georgia has really had Tennessee's number in the Josh Heupel era. Last 2 years, the spread for the game was essentially right about where it is right now, somewhere between that 9 and 10-point range. Georgia won by 28 points in Knoxville last year, 14 points in Athens the previous year. First matchup for Josh Heupel against Georgia back in 2021, Georgia won by 24 points. This is a Kirby Smart coach team that's just sort of had Tennessee's number in the Heupel era. A little bit of a different kind of Tennessee team for Josh Heupel this year. They're better with running the ball. They're probably far better defensively than they've been. But something about that and the fact that people aren't really running away from Georgia, despite what they put on film a week ago, is enough to get me to take the flyer here minus the 9.5 points. I think it'll be a hot crowd. I think it'll be a better performance from UGA. I would consider taking Tennessee plus the points with the idea that Georgia still wins. But ultimately, I'm going to go Georgia here minus the 9.5. That, though, puts the flow, though, on the side of Tennessee. Dari, you want to go with the flow and take Tennessee plus the points?
Yeah, I'm taking Tennessee here all day. I mean, there's nothing that's giving me any kind of confidence in Georgia with the offense. I think it starts the offensive line's had issues all year. They're thin at running back. They can't do it. They're not throwing the ball downfield. They're not attacking over the middle. Beck is second-guessing everything. There's nothing here. I mean, this is just kind of everyone's waiting for it to come together. This is just who they are. I mean, this is the identity. And I think looking back at past history of teams against Tennessee isn't a good indicator because last year Georgia manhandled Ole Miss by 30-plus points. So Tennessee is going to cover this game. And, I mean, hopefully Georgia can find a way to get a victory, but I think they're going to continue to have turnovers that are going to hurt them.
Let me say this. You bring up a really good point that, hey, past performance not indicative of future results because last year Georgia blew out Ole Miss, and that was clearly a different game this past Saturday. But, Dari, let me ask you, though, have you noticed what I feel like I've noticed, which is given the foibles of Georgia, you're really not seeing what looks to be a floodgate of very large bets on Tennessee here right now. I mean, the spread to me almost begs you to take Tennessee. Some of that obviously probably impacted by Nico Imalileva's injury. But you don't really see a lot of what looks to be right now people cutting in line to take the Vols at this, what I think of as sort of a bargain price here.
I mean, open at 9.5, it's down to 8.5. We'll see if it moves. I mean, it's already moved the point. I mean, maybe it moves down to 8, by kickoff. I mean, I think that's the only positive sign for Georgia right now is where Vegas set that line. But I think that's based on the talent that's on paper and not really how the flow of the offense is going right now that seems to be dysfunctional as well as play calling. I think it's all feeding each other on it. I can't bet it.
I think Dari and I may use different sports books. I think that's one of the lessons learned from all of this. But nonetheless, fun stuff with Georgia and Tennessee there coming up on Saturday. Another fun matchup in the SEC. Last week we had a throwback to the old Big 8 with Missouri taking on Oklahoma, and this week we have a throwback to the old Southwest Conference days as Arkansas gets ready to host Texas. Texas, of course, given the gift of a number 3 ranking by the College Football Playoff Selection Committee, despite the fact they played essentially a high school schedule, with the exception of Georgia thus far this year. They also find themselves big favorites at Reynolds Razorback Stadium on Saturday, 13.5 points against a Hogs team that's pulled upsets already this year. Just ask those same Tennessee Vols about that. So with Texas going to Fayetteville as a 13.5-point favorite, our Cody Chaffins tells us more right now.
Arkansas will host their third top 10 opponent in Fayetteville this week as Texas comes to town. These two programs have quite the history. It'll be the 80th time the Razorbacks and Longhorns get together, but just the 7th time since Arkansas left the Southwest Conference back in 1992. Longhorns 13.5-point favorites. This is just Texas' second true road game as an SEC team. They failed to cover at Vanderbilt last month. Arkansas, though, just 2-9 against the spread in their last 11 home games. Notable exception was their upset of number 4 ranked Tennessee.
So good information there, and I think a pretty interesting game here for Sam Pittman, who's been big in this spot before, but Texas kind of hungry for a validating performance. So Mike Griffith, I come to you. Hogs getting 13.5 there in the northwest corner of the state. What do you think about Texas traveling to Fayetteville here?
Yeah, I think Texas has got some momentum. I think Texas has got something to prove. And I know that, overall the team that gets the points is usually I think statistically that's the way to bet. But, boy, I really like Texas momentum. I felt like they turned it off against a Florida team that was playing really well defensively, and they just went right through them. So give me Texas and give the points. No, sir, no Sam Pittman this week.
So, Mike, on the side of the favorite there on the road, traveling into hostile territory here. Jeff Sintel, what about for you?
Yeah, this is interesting. First of all, I can't wait to see what our colleague Kaylee Mansell is going to do on her Sam Pittman reverse chess match, underwater 4D chess that she's trying to put together this season. But for me, I think it's pretty simple. I think Texas feels like somehow that loss to Georgia won't affect it. They see the SEC championship game in their sights. They don't really have an A&M game coming up where you toss all the records out the window. But clearly, I think Arkansas reached the point this year where it summoned up its supreme effort for earlier games, most notably the Tennessee game. This line's a little scary, but I'm still going to lay the points and take the Longhorns.
So, Jeff, also on the side of the favorite here. Connor Riley, what about for you? A lot of love for Texas here thus far. Is it too much?
Yes, it is too much. This is a classic Don Draper Mad Men meme. It's the guy in the elevator saying, "I feel bad for you." That's Arkansas in this instance. And Texas is Don Draper saying, "I don't think about you at all." I think this game means a lot more to Arkansas. I think that this game is being played in Fayetteville helps Arkansas in that regard, along with the fact that I got a feeling everyone on this panel is going to take Texas based on how they look last week. Give me the Razorbacks. Give me a yes, sir, and Sam Pittman this week to at least cover the 13.5.
I do like the fact that somebody's taking the underdog here. I think that makes it fun. Kaylee, you want to join Connor and take the Hogs?
So the reality of this is whatever I pick, the opposite is going to happen.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, that's just how it's been all year. I haven't been on the right side of one, and my method has always been to take Sam Pittman in hopes that he would give me one. But I can't do that this week. I'm going to take Texas. If both of you after want to take Arkansas in light of my pick, I totally understand that. But I'm going to go with a safe option, and I want to take Texas.
I'm going to take Texas as well. Longhorns just 2-3 against the spread in 5 games against SEC competition so far this year, so no great shakes there. But it's almost like my reasoning for taking Texas is the exact opposite of what Connor mentioned a moment ago, that he says that Texas doesn't think about Arkansas at all. But the truth is part of the reason I like Texas in this game is I do believe a result from a couple of years ago, perhaps Steve Sarkisian, the motivation that he needs to make sure his team is truly focused for Saturday. Go back to Sark's first year at Texas in 2021. Arkansas beat them up that year, beat them 40-21. So any thought that this could be a Texas team that sort of sleepwalks past this for Arkansas, I think that result kind of gives Sark perhaps the ammunition that he needs. The other thing here is this is an Arkansas team that has certainly played well at times here this year. Obviously, most prominently the victory against Tennessee, but all of a sudden that feels like a few weeks ago. Last 3 games for Arkansas over the course of the last 4 weeks, really the last 5 weeks here now. You're talking about a blowout loss to LSU, a blowout loss to Ole Miss, with a win against Mississippi State, which literally everybody gets, kind of coupled in between all of that. I think the sense you get is, and what might end up being Sam Pittman's final year at Arkansas, this is a Hogs team that's perhaps reeling here a bit, kind of trying to figure out who still has gas left in the tank. Very important question to ask. And I'm not really quite so sure how much Arkansas still has left to give here. It's not been pretty for them over the course of the last 5 weeks in their last 3 games. So that's enough for me, with Texas having plenty to play for and perhaps the reminder of being upset in the past. I'll take Texas minus the 13.5 on the road. That puts the flow on the side of the Longhorns too. Dari, you want to go with the flow and take Texas?
Well, it all starts with data. It all starts with a lot of research, crunching the numbers, riding the trends. And in this, Kaylee does not pick this right. So going against Manziel here is all the data I need. So I will take Arkansas to cover this number. And, hey, I'll probably even sprinkle a little money line on it. And Sam Pittman looking to get his second top 10 victory and keep his job.
Well, I'd be the happiest guy in the world if they did win the game, especially outright like that. So that should be fun. Traditional yearly game, not quite a rivalry, but a yearly series in the SEC continues again here this year as Florida gets ready to host LSU. Both these teams coming off ugly losses a year ago, but it's LSU a year ago and a week ago. Both in this case. A week ago for both these teams. But it is LSU traveling to Gainesville as a 4.5-point favorite there on Saturday. Let's get more information on the Tigers going to see the Gators.
LSU and Florida, 2 teams coming off back-to-back losses as they get together in Gainesville this week. Tigers are 4.5-point favorites. LSU's won the last 5 games in this rivalry. They're 4-0-1 against the spread in those 5 wins as well. Florida, a home underdog now for the 5th time this season. That's as many as their last 5 seasons combined. Gators 2-2 against the spread this season in this situation, and 6-3 since 2019.
So interesting information there. Florida sees itself as a 4.5-point home underdog with LSU. Mike Griffith, we come back to you.
Yeah, I mean, DJ Lagway's status means everything for Florida. They're just a different team with him, and they say he's on the mend and he's doing better. I don't know if I'm buying that. I feel like LSU's got nothing to lose right now. They're playing, on the road in the swamp against a Florida team that may have mailed it in now that they know their head coach will be back for another year. So I guess between Lagway's uncertainty and the performance that I saw from Florida against Texas last week, I'm going to take LSU and lay the points.
Yeah, the Lagway situation involving that hamstring worth monitoring held out last week against Texas, despite the fact that they kind of flirted with the idea that he might play. You kind of wonder when they might get him back, whether or not that ends up being this week. Jeff Sintel to you, 4.5 points is the number here. Florida getting them from LSU.
Yeah, that's a number that makes you pause. Obviously, Alabama showed the world how you beat LSU last week. Besides having a live Tiger on the field, you need a running quarterback. Unfortunately, Florida's running quarterback likely won't be doing any running if he even gets on the field. I think LSU still wants to find some sneaky way through that labyrinth of SEC tiebreakers to get to the playoff, perhaps to even get to Atlanta. I'm going to lay the points, take the Tigers in a get-right game this week.
So a little bit of love there for LSU. And by the way, we record this show on a Wednesday. Billy Napier speaking about DJ Lagway earlier today, saying he continues to improve, progress every day, trending in the right direction. So pretty cryptic on that, as most coaches have been, allowing their availability reports to do the talking here. And the first availability report for LSU and Florida has not come out at the time of this recording. But Connor Riley still has the responsibility of making his pick now. A little bit of love for LSU, 4.5-point favorites at Florida. Connor, you want to get involved here with the Fighting Tigers?
I do. I don't think that LSU is going to play bad for a 3rd consecutive game. I think they're going to figure some things out. And I think they're going to find a way to move the ball in this Florida defense. I still like Garrett Nussmeier as a quarterback. So give me LSU minus the 4.5 here in Gainesville, whether DJ Lagway plays or not.
And also whether Omar Bradley, the now infamous Tiger, makes his return. I'm guessing he won't. LSU remains the pick no matter what there. Kaylee Manziel, what about for you?
I hate going with the majority here, but I am also going to take LSU. I mean, I know that they haven't done great against a mobile quarterback, but I don't know how mobile DJ Lagway is going to be regardless. So I'm going to go with Tigers.
Yeah, I'm going to take LSU here, too. I actually think that Florida could perhaps be a little bit of a live dog next week as they get ready to take on Ole Miss. Not quite so sure about this week with LSU. I mean, one thing to keep in mind here is, even though LSU necessarily hasn't been great as a road favorite, 3-5 in their last 8 when favored on the road in the Brian Kelly era, the truth is this is an LSU team that still has a good bit to play for. Now, Their college football playoff ranking is not very high. They lost a game out of conference in addition to their 2 losses so far in the league. But when you start looking at some of these tiebreakers and things like that, as Peter Burns from the SEC Network has pointed out, LSU, if you get the right confluence of events, frankly, not all that outrageous, LSU, by virtue of tiebreaker, could still be in the SEC championship. So both these teams blown out a week ago, and yet LSU is still the one that has something to sell to its players and something to play for. And I think that little bit of motivation factor could be enough here. I believe we see probably a rise-up performance from Florida at some point before the season ends, maybe most likely at the end of the regular season against in-state rival Florida State, perhaps next week against Ole Miss. I don't think it's this week, though. I like LSU to kind of bounce back after an ugly one, to go on the road and kind of get back to their winning ways here against Florida. I'll take them minus the 4.5. That puts the flow on the side of Brian Kelly and LSU as well. Dari, you want to go with the flow and take the Tigers here?
No, I mean, I don't know if Lagway's playing, but I'm assume he will give it a go, and I'll take Florida to cover that number and maybe get a win at home.
Okay, so a little bit of a opportunity for Dari to move up the standings, depending on how that game works out. A little bit of a contrarian take based on some of what you heard there. Now, speaking of contrarian take, perhaps a contrarian spread. I have to admit, I was surprised by this. South Carolina, newly minted in this week's college football playoff top 25, takes on another team that's kind of found a home in those rankings as well. That's Missouri. Missouri fresh off a win last week in what we'll call a rivalry game against Oklahoma, and the Gamecocks go to Nashville and kind of got the best of Vanderbilt. An impressive win for a Gamecocks team that's suddenly having a very good season. And in a roundabout way, both these teams have at least faint college football playoff hopes still alive, depending on how results perhaps shake out. So for more on that, let's hear Cody Chaffins give us the tale of the tape as South Carolina hosts Missouri.
Missouri goes to the other Columbia this week as they will take on South Carolina, and the Gamecocks are 12.5-point favorites as the two play for the Mayor's Cup. This is the biggest spread for the Gamecocks at home in an SEC game against anybody not named Vanderbilt since at least 2017. Mizzou's won the last 5 games in the series, which means Eli Drinkwitz has never lost to South Carolina.
Yeah, Cody Chaffins, good numbers. Mike Griffith, how about the relatively surprising spread here? I would say South Carolina, pretty robust, 12.5-point favorite. What do you want to do with this, the battle of the two Columbias?
Yeah, another unclear quarterback situation with Brady Cook as we tape this show, Brandon. I mean, boy, that seems like a lot of points. And Missouri is just a night and day difference with or without Brady Cook. Gamecocks won impressively last week against Vanderbilt on the road. So with Brady Cook's status uncertain, I have no choice but to take South Carolina at home and lay the points. So
Mike Griffith on the side of the very big favorite in South Carolina. Jeff Sintel, what about for you?
I'm going to be on that side as well. I think South Carolina is definitely the media darlings, especially the national media, at least as far as the defensive side of the ball. I think their defensive front is as nasty as anyone in the SEC, and that's how you go and you knock off teams. I think it was kind of funny that Drink was able to say we keep our playoff hopes alive after last week's win. Well, I don't think he'll be saying it this week. I think the Gamecocks roll and look pretty stout in doing so.
So no hesitation about South Carolina, minus a big number here right now, the Brady Cook's unknown status factoring into that. Connor, what about for you? 12.5 is the number.
Yes, Brady Cook's status is unknown. Yes, South Carolina has the best unit in this game in their defensive line, but I think Missouri's offensive line is going to be up to the task. And I like for Missouri to at least keep this game close this week. I don't know if they're going to find a way to win it and upset it in Columbia, and as Jeff mentioned, keep those playoff hopes alive. But I like Missouri in the points here. I think there's a proud team up there in Columbia. In my opinion, the better of the two Columbias. And so give me Missouri here to at least keep it close.
All right, so that's our first take on Mizzou in this particular pick. Kaylee Manziel, you jump in here now. What do you think about Missouri going to South Carolina?
Sorry if it's loud. My AirPods died. But I think that South Carolina is probably one of the most underrated teams in the SEC. And I think Elijah Drinkowitz saying that they control their own playoff destiny, I think that was the kiss of death. So I'm going to take South Carolina, big win at home.
So, man, a lot of love for South Carolina minus a very big number here. For me this year a couple of times when the spread has seemed like really out of whack, sometimes you might be convinced to say, okay, well, I'm going to trust that somebody knows something that I don't. But a few times this year, I've had the courage of my own conviction and said, no, this is just not right. We did this a couple of weeks ago, most recently, when Vanderbilt went to Auburn. We said that's a ridiculous spread. There's no way that should be the case, and we were easily on the right side of that. I think the same thing is true here, and I've got a lot of respect for South Carolina. I think that Shane Beamer's doing a good job with that team this year, primarily for, as Connor Riley mentioned, what they're doing defensively here right now. But to kind of harken back on a couple of numbers that Cody Chavin's also sort of touched on, the truth is, in the Eli Drinkwitz era, Drink has sort of had South Carolina's number here. It's 34-12 last year, 23-10 the year before that against a pretty good South Carolina team in 2022. Never lost overall in his tenure there as Missouri coach against South Carolina. And the other thing that Cody pointed out, he kind of took it from a little bit different tack, but it's the same general point I'd make here too. When you look at South Carolina kind of favored by a margin like this, 12 or more, over the course of the last few years, you only see a couple of instances where that's even been true against an SEC team, both of those against Vanderbilt. One time they covered, one time they didn't. Just 6-4 in their last 10 when favored by 12 or more points. This is pretty, I would say, rare air, kind of high altitude for a South Carolina program right now. And I like the Gamecocks and I like Shane Beamer, but I don't like them minus 12.5 here, whether Brady Cook plays or not. So I'll take Missouri plus the points. And that puts the flow still, though, on the side of South Carolina. You want to go with the flow? Actually, it puts the flow on the side of – no, so yeah, it puts the flow inside of South Carolina. Dari, you want to go with the flow and take South Carolina here?
Yeah, I mean, it's lots of chalk, but I'm going to take South Carolina to cover this number. They've covered now 9 out of 10 of their last games against the spread against conference opponents, and I think they're going to get it done in a big way. They're going to get a lot of pressure in that backfield with that D-line.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to this game. I think that is potentially an awful lot of fun. And one of the things I hope you're all looking forward to is checking out the Friday edition of DawgNation Daily and our R.S. Andrews Cool Down at the conclusion of the show. We'll give you even more picks if you'll check that out. It's already aired by the time you see this show. We'll give you some thoughts on the number 1 ranked team in the country, Oregon, traveling to one of the most hostile venues in the Big Ten, Camp Randall Stadium and Wisconsin, plus our best bets from across the entirety of the sport. We'll give all of that to you as a part of the R.S. Andrews Cool Down at the conclusion of the Friday edition of DawgNation Daily. But for now, one more pick for us to make on this show, and we step outside of SEC play to do it. To see a Clemson team who moved up to number 20 in the college football playoff rankings this week, and perhaps right now a resume booster for Georgia because of that ranking, but they need to stay hot in order for that to be the case. Winners last week at Virginia Tech, but now traveling to Pitt. Of course, the Panthers have given Clemson trouble over the years in the Dabo Swinney era. But in this particular case, they find themselves as 10.5-point home underdogs with the Tigers coming to town. So let's get more from Cody Chaffins on Clemson taking on Pitt.
Clemson on the road at Pitt. Tigers 10.5-point favorites over the Panthers. The last time Clemson played Pitt was also the last time Clemson was a road underdog in the ACC. That was back in 2021. Clemson lost to Pitt that day 27-17. The Panthers 7-3 against the spread when home dogs in ACC play. That includes upsetting number 14 Louisville last year.
So very interesting information. This was, to begin the week, a top 25 matchup, although Pitt did fall out on the verge of their second straight loss. So Clemson goes to Pitt. The number here is 10.5. Mike Griffith, we come back to you. What do you want to do as the Panthers host the Tigers?
Yeah, interesting game. You know, Clemson's still trying to fight their way into the college football playoff. Things have taken a turn at Pitt. I'm going to ride the momentum and the road team, take Clemson, give the points.
So Mike on the side of Clemson here, laying the number. Jeff Sintel, how about you?
I think I'm going to benefit from the number. I just like something here in this game. I don't know if I can accurately predict the winner, but I do like this number. I'm going to take those points, and I'm going to take Pitt in this.
So split decision. Connor Riley, what about for you?
I'm stunned that Mike is going against Pat Narduzzi here at home, but I agree with him. I'm taking Clemson here on the points. This Pitt team is going in the wrong direction at this time of the year. And Clemson, well, yes, the loss to Louisville was bad a few weeks ago. I think they figured some things out on the road last week at Virginia Tech, and I like them to do the same against Pitt this week.
Yeah, I agree with Connor on that last point. I thought it was a pretty impressive performance. They got the best shot from Virginia Tech, hostile environment last week, and Clemson looked good on their way to a 10-point win there. Kaylee Manziel, what about for you?
I don't feel great about taking either one of these teams, but Clemson just hasn't done enough for me to scream 10-point favorite on the road. Pitt hasn't shown much either, but I trust their defense to keep it close, so I'm going to take Pitt.
Yeah, Clemson just 2-1 this year when favored on the road, although they did cover last week, 5.5 points, but I had the number as they won the game by 10 points. It's a pretty impressive showing. And so from that standpoint, you might think, well, Clemson's the right side here, and maybe they turn out to be. But one of the things we've had some success with this season is being very cautious about teams having to do it multiple weeks in a row. Pretty tough road environment last week at Lane Stadium. Clemson passed that test. Kind of ask yourself this question: who does that now 2 weeks in a row in sort of tricky road situations, especially with some expectation for margin here? It takes a pretty good team to do that. And while Clemson's better than most, I don't quite know they kind of rise to the level of the team who's sort of a blind bet rubber stamp in every single road spot they're going to find themselves in. So I'd be surprised if they lost the game, but I'd also be surprised if they covered for a second consecutive week here for a team that did get handled pretty easily at home a few weeks ago against Louisville. So I think there's value on Pitt here plus the 10.5 to at least stem the tide of what has been some pretty significant erosion over the course of the last couple of games. I'll take a flyer on Pitt plus 10.5. Dari, I'll come to you with the flow here on the side of Clemson. We'll go with the flow and take the Tigers?
Yeah, I think Clemson's going to be able to get this number. I prefer it under 10, but I think they're going to cover it.
So a little bit of love there on Clemson, perhaps making another statement as among the class in the SEC. A league at this point in time that is pretty difficult to figure out. Of course, we always appreciate R.S. Andrews for what they do here for us, making this show possible and making a lot of comfort and enjoyment possible for you. One of the things that can ruin your weekend, if you're getting ready to watch some college football, if you've got friends coming over or maybe family coming over later on for the Thanksgiving time of year, some sort of plumbing emergency where a pipe bursts or the water heater goes out or something like that, that's the kind of thing that can really in your enjoyment of whatever it is you're trying to be a part of. But with R.S. Andrews, the RS stands for rapid service. And so they want to step up quickly and immediately to meet your need if you've got that plumbing emergency. If your water heater goes out, in many cases, they can replace it for you the same day. If there's some sort of pipe issue, something like that, obviously I'm not an expert on that kind of thing, but I know when the water's not working the way that it's supposed to, and I know what to do when that happens. That's to reach out to our friends at R.S. Andrews. And my encouragement would be for you to do the same thing. Please find them online, rsandrews.com. That's rsandrews.com. That's the most direct way to get in touch with someone who can solve that plumbing emergency for you just like that. And we'll see you for the Friday edition of DawgNation Daily. It's already aired by the time you see this. For our pick on Oregon traveling to Wisconsin and the rest of our best bets too. We'll see you then. And of course, back here next week at this same time for Go With The Flow, presented by R.S. Andrews. We'll talk to you then, everybody.